At our house, we watch three main types of shows on TV. The first is just sports. Football, hockey, and soccer if we can find it. The second thing that is watched in our house is BritBox. I don't know if the rest of you watch that, but that's Call of the Midwife and Agatha Christie, cozy murder mysteries, that sort of thing. And the third is HGTV. And here, of course, we find home renovation shows and occasionally shows that take us around the world to look at the variety of homes and buildings that humans have created. So here are some of the strangest ones that I've found. Maybe. This is the Beagle Hotel in Idaho. Unfortunately, it used to be that you could stay in the Beagle overnight, but the people who did it retired this year, and so now you can just go look at it. This is the Longaberger Basket Building, and the company has now gone out of business since 2018, but Longaberger is apparently still a household name in Ohio. Can you guess what they did? At its peak in the year 2000, Dave Longaberger's company employed more than 8,200 people. And so he says, I figured if Walt Disney could build an empire around a mouse, the Longaberger home office building could resemble a basket. Whenever I talked about it, he says, people looked at me like I was nuts. This building is called the Fred and Ginger Building because it resembles a dancing couple. It's in Prague. And this one in Dalat, Vietnam, is just called the Crazy House. It doesn't need any other description, I suppose. Similar to that, but slightly different, is the Crooked House in Poland. This particular thing is not actually a house, even though they call it a house. It's part of a mall, essentially. And you can walk in there and then walk to the rest of the mall that's not so crooked. And this one I kind of like. This is called the Teapot. It's in China. It's actually a tourist information center. It not only has this elaborate lighting that you see, but it also rotates. So apparently being weird and strange can be too much of a good thing because the Chinese government, following the opening of the Teapot House, decided in 2014 to ban builders all over the country from building houses with strange or bizarre shapes. It actually hasn't worked because they keep doing it. So our text this morning comes from 1 Peter chapter 2, the first 10 verses. And in this section, what we're doing is we're moving from talking about you and I as individual Christians and to start talking about the community that the Christian belongs to, the church. That is not what we want. In a world of strangeness that we've been talking about, the church stands out as unique, as weird, as strange. And for believers who find themselves existing as exiles in a world that is increasingly foreign to us, the community that we call the church, the thing that you and I belong to, is the primary social context in which you and I grow and worship and find our safety and our identity in the community of Jesus. The fellowship of our fellow travelers is intended to reduce the pain we feel from our social alienation. So there's a writer named Theme Perkins, and he says this: our images of community have an important impact on our behavior and relationship with others. So the question that I want to think about this morning and talk about for a few moments with you is, what kind of strange building is this thing that we call church? What are the images that you use in your head and that you think of when you hear church? So the first thing we want to say is that this strange building is built on the cornerstone of Jesus. Sorry about that verse. That's just me messing up my slide. When Peter says that Jesus is the cornerstone, what he is saying is that orientation to the cornerstone is essential to the building standing up. One's response to... Sorry, we got problems there with the slides there. I'm not sure where they're... Can you sync it, Newly? Just click sync on the top right. Did that do it? I don't think so. Okay, let's start over. Look at all those strange buildings. There, that looks better. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans but chosen by God and precious to him, Peter says. This cornerstone is the thing that enables us to stay standing up. So one of the... Man alive. Got all sorts of weird things going on here. It's very strange, yeah. Okay, let's try that. All right, imagine the Tower of Pisa. You remember what it looks like? It's leaning. The tower began to lean as soon as they started building it in the 12th century, so 800 years ago. And the reason that it started to lean was because the soft ground underneath the foundation, which meant that it could not properly handle the weight of the structure. It got worse as they kept building on it, obviously, because they just kept adding more weight and more weight and more weight. So by the time it reached 1990, the tilt of the Tower of Pisa had reached 5.5 degrees. So they did a whole bunch of stabilization and remedial work, and now it has reduced the tilt to 3.97 degrees. Though I don't know why someone calculated it to that level. But Peter is very clear about this point. Your attitude towards Jesus determines your relationship to God. Jesus, Peter says, is the stone that was rejected by the world but honored by God. Jesus is the foundation of everything that God has done with the world. It all stands and falls with Jesus. So God's building depends on Jesus as the cornerstone of the building, the stone which determines the shape of everything else. Ill and weak, unable to hold up, station of all the other stones. If the cornerstone is placed incorrectly, or if it's placed on an angle, all the other stones that get placed on top of it follow that same angle. In the same way, Peter argues that Jesus determines the orientation of everything that the church does. So, the basic test of our faithfulness to God is whether our actions and our beliefs line up with Jesus. For example, if we start to believe things that lead us to hate other people, to minimize their worth and their value to God, then we are wrong. Because Jesus was clear that loving our neighbor is central to what it means to follow him. You and I know that there are lots of options out there for choosing how we will orient ourselves to God and to each other. There's a lot of noise in our lives today. Lots of people are calling for your attention. How do you determine who to follow? Literally on something like Twitter. Who do we listen to? Whose influence really matters to us? What Peter does is call us back to just one answer: Jesus. If our thoughts or our actions do not match up with Jesus, they are taking us away from God. They are causing the building of our lives to lean. Peter backs up his argument with quotes or allusions to 6 Old Testament passages in the verses that we follow here. These ones that we see. To you, those of you who believe, this stone is precious, but those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. It's pretty easy for us in our world to get distracted by the various calls for our attention and our allegiance. Christians should do this. Christians should do that. The church should be involved in this issue. We need to stand up for the truth, a truth which often is not actually an issue for Jesus. And so the old hymn says, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of life will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." I like how Ian Thomas says it. He says, "Every day, the world will drag you by the hand yelling, 'This is important, and this is important, and this is important. You need to worry about this, and this, and this.' And each day, it's up to you to yank your hand back, put it on your heart, and say, 'No, this is what's important.' For Peter, there's only one person that can demand our ultimate attention and allegiance, and that is Jesus. And yes, people will try to use Jesus to try to back up their arguments. And that's why it is crucial for us to actually spend time with Jesus. Read his words regularly, spend time with him in prayer, invite his presence into all of our thoughts and actions. More than ever, you and I need to practice the skill of discernment to determine whether actions and words are lining up with the cornerstone. Thomas Schreiner says this: "The life of Christ functions as a pattern for Christians, despised by many, but chosen and honored in God's sight, destined for vindication after suffering." We, too, are the stones that are rejected by the world, but honored by God. And so Martin Luther wrote, "When I look at myself, I don't see how I can be saved. But when I look at Jesus, I don't see how I could be lost." The foundation of this strange building that we call the church is only and can only ever be Jesus. But this building is continually under renovation. Peter says, "As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house." In 2013, our family went to Europe, and we went to Paris for a while, and we went to see the famous Notre Dame Cathedral in person. That was 11 years ago. Well, 5 years ago, you probably remember this. This is an overhead image of the Notre Dame Cathedral burning in April 2019. That's 5.5 years ago. And this one, there's another one. And then this one is from the inside of the building. The cathedral has been closed for the last 5.5 years as it has undergone an extensive and very expensive, about $1 billion Canadian, in renovations. There's been, they do things like they've been trying to find special oak trees in the countryside of France, and they've had over 1,000 artisans working on the building. Many of those artisans are people that they don't even do stuff today. They're medieval kind of things, stonemasons and stained glass renovations and that sort of thing. This week, they announced that the building will be open for visitors on December 7th of this year. They say that 42,000 people a month go through to see Notre Dame. It actually has more visitors per year than the Eiffel Tower. It's a pretty remarkable feat of restoration in just over 5 years. And it doesn't mean that it's done. There's going to be continuing renovation, but for the first time in centuries, it was built in, I've lost it now, 1400. It's the first time when you and I could go to see the building now and it actually be cleaned. That is, that it will look more like the beginning than it did in the last 300 years. So I was thinking about this as I read verse 4. And as the people of God, you and I become part of this spiritual building that God is creating, we realize suddenly that the building, there goes Grandpa, the building is us. The building that God is creating is with us, that you and I are somehow living stones. But it's not something that just happens overnight. Becoming holy, as we saw last week, or spiritual formation, is a normal and necessary part of our growth. We are living stones. And so there's pain, and there's time, and there's effort involved in that process. It involves being shaped and being formed. That means that you have to cut off some things. Some things need to be removed, as we saw in the reading this morning. Verse 1 talks about getting rid of malice and deceit, and hypocrisy and envy and slander of every kind. I'm always intrigued by these lists because often they don't match up with the things we think are important. But these sins, Peter says, are matters of the heart. They come from the deepest desires within us. To get what we want, to look better than we are, to try to make others less than they are. There's also a positive command in verse 2. You get rid of some things, but also Peter says you must crave spiritual milk so that you'll grow up. I wonder if sometimes in the church, many of the issues we have as church people are what my wife calls playground problems. When we grow up, we should know better, especially since, as Peter writes, you have tasted that the Lord is good. It's a process then to be part of this building, to grow up, but we can take deliberate steps to do that. We can offer ourselves to be renovated, to be changed, to be formed into the type of stones that a builder can use. The obvious problem is we too often resist the shaping. We want to argue with the designer. It's a constant renovation process. Third, this strange building is a place where people are supposed to find God. You're being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And verse 9, he says it again, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood. This week was the anniversary of the beginning of the Protestant Reformation for most people, when Martin Luther famously pasted his 95 Theses on the Wittenberg Castle Church door. Several of those theses that he wanted to debate had to do with the corruption of the priests in the 16th century. And one of the things that was emphasized as a result of the Protestant Reformation was that ordinary Christians have equal access to God as any clergy or priest does. That's a big deal for that change to have happened. But I think there's something even more shocking to me in this metaphor. Think about what a priest is supposed to do. He brings people into contact with God. In the Old Testament, the tribe of Levi was specifically chosen as the priests of Israel. They're chosen to take care of the house of God, first in the tabernacle and then in the temple, and they were made separate. That is, they were made holy in order to do specific things. They offered sacrifices on behalf of the people to God in order to restore the relationship between him and his people. So when Peter says that you and I are a holy priesthood and a royal priesthood, he's making a pretty spectacular statement, I think. You and I are now to be considered, this week I was really struck by these images. You and I represent God in the world. It's such an incredible opportunity for us and a big responsibility. When people look at you and they look at me, they are supposed to see God. Our likeness to Jesus should be obvious and noticeable. And yet, when we look at the behavior of many who call themselves Christians in the past week, I am struck by how unchristlike the words and actions have been. On the one hand, this drives me almost to weep in despair. Again and again and again, people see and listen to our words, especially our political rhetoric, and say, "And you call those words of hate and anger Christ-like, Christian?" The work of God is so damaged by the people who call themselves Christians. And yet Peter invites us to move forward, to realign ourselves with Jesus once again. What would it look like for you and me to take our function as the holy and royal priesthood of God seriously? What would it look like for me to bring God to my neighbors, to my coworkers, to my family? What would it look like for me to hear and witness their sin and be able to tell them that through Jesus, those sins are forgiven? Could we listen to their pain and to their sorrow and to their fears? And could we call them home again to the God who loves them enough to die for them? What would it look like for this strange building that we call church to be the place where people find God? This strange building is also a people. We have been called out of darkness to light. We are the ones, Peter says, who have received mercy. Now we are the ones who offer mercy. And then finally, this strange building is intended to showcase God. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. As we reach the end of this section, it's like Peter is just getting started. This is who you are, he shouts. You are chosen, you are royal, you are holy. And no, this wasn't who you used to be, but it is now. And this has always been God's plan. By using these images, Peter describes the church in ways that the Old Testament described Israel. We are joined with the historical people of God, not just in our description, but also in our mission. We are to declare the praises of God to make him known. This is God's one and only plan. Israel and the church together, Jesus and us. That's God's plan to save the world, to work through us. The people who receive mercy are the ones who are to offer mercy. The people who were the outcasts, the rejected, the homeless, are the one who God honors with a home, with a mission, with a Father. Just as Jesus was rejected by the world and honored by God, so we have been rejected and honored. And just as Jesus suffered, we should also expect to suffer. Just as Jesus revealed God through his life, death, and resurrection, we are to reveal God through our lives. I know that many of you are feeling quite anxious about how the election will turn out on Tuesday in the U.S. There's no doubt that it will affect us, regardless of who wins. One of the ways that we can handle anxiety is to remind ourselves of wonder, to experience wonder, to know that the sun will rise again tomorrow and every tomorrow until Jesus returns. So this week, my encouragement is see if you can catch the sunrise tomorrow and the next day and the next day. It should be easier. It's an hour later. Remind yourself that regardless of who holds the reins of political power, they are only temporary. God reigns over his creation as he has since the beginning of time, and despite all the appearances, we, as the followers of Jesus, are the privileged ones. We are the chosen people. We are the royal priesthood. We are the holy nation. We are God's special possession. We are the people who have received God's mercy. You and I are the ones that God has chosen to be his temple, where he lives through his Holy Spirit. Isn't that remarkable? We are the place where people find God. We are the priests who carry the message of forgiveness and relief from their sins through the blood of Jesus. We are the children of God. And so when you look around this morning and you spend some time talking to each other, I encourage you to find hope in the people of God. So, a couple things for you to think about. If we are the place and people where people are intended to meet God, how are you and I doing? What would it look like for you to serve as a priest of God to those around you this week? What would it look like for you and I, the ones who have received mercy, to offer mercy? And second, if I return to the quote from Feem Perkins, our images of community have an important impact on our behavior and relationship with others. Throughout the centuries, the Christian church has looked different. That should be expected because the church is people. So what is the dominant image for you when you think about the church? Is it the church as a cathedral, or is it a hospital? Is it extended family? Or perhaps it's school, or a stadium, or a rest stop. Whichever images that you choose, each of them reflects a different aspect of our mission and purpose. How does that image affect how we do church? Let me give you one example. If the church is a cathedral, you should expect it to be quiet. If the church is an extended family, not so much, right? How do those images match up with the images that Peter has given us this morning? Ultimately, our purpose is to declare the praises of God. And so Peter calls us not to retreat from the world, but to engage with the world. The church is a strange building. The people who make it up are weird, they're complicated, they're strange, and they're wonderful. This week, despite all the distractions we are bound to encounter, let's keep our eyes on Jesus. Let's make sure our foundation is solid and that what we are allowing ourselves to be built into is something that brings people to God. Let's pray. Our Father, would you help us with this? We are both awed and dismayed, I suppose, in some ways, as we think about what you have called us to be. It seems large and daunting, and yet at the same time, it is so hopeful. Would you help us to be the people who bring hope to the world this week? In Jesus' name.